every once in a while you have to take a leap of faith.
In some ways, in an industry where everybody wants scale, everybody wants to do things quickly, does the way you actually do your sourcing become a bottleneck?
I think that this will be the age of India's sort of soft power. It is the need of the hour to provide 20 million new jobs every year in rural areas. What oil is to Saudi Arabia, our entrepreneurs are to India. I have seen hundreds of business models come like rockets and go.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to Future Unplugged, where we bring you unfiltered conversations with leaders across India Inc. as we navigate the landscape of disruption. I'm your host Sanjeev Krishan, and today we have a truly inspiring guest, William Bissell, chairman of Fabindia. Fabindia isn't just a retail brand. It's a pioneering social enterprise that has empowered thousands of rural artisans, preserved Indian crafts, and created a blueprint for blending tradition with modern business. William has been at the helm steering Fabindia through the complex challenges of legacy leadership, innovation, sustainability, and scaling social impact, all without losing the soul of the brand. For everyone tuning in, this episode is a masterclass in how to lead with purpose in today's fast-changing world, balancing growth, innovation, and deep social responsibility. William, thanks for joining us. There are many businesses, retail businesses, which have done what they are trying to do. India is a consumption-focused market, etc. But when we think about Fabindia, we of course think about what you do in business, what you're doing in fashion, what you do in retail, and so on and so forth. But the first and foremost thing is what's got you here, and in some ways the deep impact that you've made on societies to create the outcomes that you create. I just want to start from there. How did it all start, William? And also talk to us a little bit about your personal aspiration for what was the origin of Fabindia in the future.
So Sanjeev, I am second generation. I grew up with the brand. We traveled a lot, and I noticed wherever we traveled, there was some cluster that we could visit. And in that way, I really got to see parts of rural India that nobody had seen from my age group, just for the fact that we traveled so much and got to see where different things were produced. And you'd drive 100 kilometers and the sweets would change, the food would change, there would be even some changes in the language, and more importantly, the traditions of craft and what was produced changed. So it was this great introduction, which started at a young age. I then decided I thought my career was in journalism, so I went into journalism for a while, and then my father very sadly fell ill, and I had to make a decision, so I joined the business. And it was interesting because at that time, the business industry was largely, there were no brands. It was completely unbranded. I mean, every locality had tailors, and it was all local and very small scale, not branded. And the other thing is that retail was completely unorganized. I mean, markets, had existed for a long time. There was no concept of malls and all. So I sensed that there was going to be a shift from unbranded to branded, and there was going to be a shift from unorganized retail to organized retail, and that shift was inevitable. And we were in that way an early mover because we saw this shift happening, and you could see. I came of age into the workforce in 1991, which, as you know, was a pivotal year because that is when the liberalization started. And we were, until 1991, we were largely an export business, completely an export business. And we would sell under the brands, other well-known brands in Europe and America. And it was a business that I could see had a future, but not one where you could build your own brand. You were always going to be selling under somebody else's brand. And So it was a combination of these two things coming together that was a kind of an aha moment, of saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. And in a way, we took a risk. We opened our first retail stores in the early 90s, which business was very slow. And because people were not used to buying branded, material and, and our goal was to set up a nationwide brand. And more importantly than that, our goal was to set up a brand that really represented India and kind of products from the country and styles. And so there were a few brands that were being built in those early days, which you're aware of, and they were always said, oh, this brand is like a Marks and Spencer's, or this brand is like a Gap, or this was, and they actively modeled themselves on it. But we decided to say, okay, culturally there is going to be a moment when a generation says, look, we have great accomplishments and we want to celebrate them in our own way, with our own clothes, with our own home furnishings, and that's where we wanted to be. So we just took that positioning in the market. And it's one of those things where if you go to a market research firm, they will survey people and say there's no demand right now for it. But that's why I think there are the limits of market research, which is a great thing, but every once in a while you have to take a leap of faith. And so we took a leap of faith, and that's why we're here today.
So you started from a lot of exports you mentioned, and then of course embraced local market, so to speak. As you think about the future, and your tagline says India goes global at this point in time, do you see that you would continue to do a lot in India? India is a consumption market, as we discussed. Or do you think that the uptake on India is, and with the Indian diaspora in particular, do you think is that going to be a greater focus for you in times ahead?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the issue of the diaspora, because the diaspora has been exploding. And exploding in two ways. One is exploding in numbers, just the sheer number of people going abroad every year. I think it's over 1 million now every year. And the position that those people occupy in the countries that they go to. So a lot of the people who are emigrating today are what would be traditionally called white-collar jobs. And they're going at a young age, and they're becoming chartered accountants and going in. And then they're rising up in their profession. So they have created, in fact, what I call the base market for India, which is when we go to any market, the first supporters we get are the Indian diaspora.
Right.
But if you look at markets where we've been for many years, like Malaysia and Singapore and Dubai, what we found is it starts with the Indian diaspora, but it builds very quickly out from there. And I think that this will be the age of India's sort of soft power, which is, from its films, from yoga, from Ayurveda, but also from fashion and ideas. And we can already see the catwalks in the West being influenced by that.
So Indian diaspora is your best ambassador in that sense.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that's a great tagline for us. The other piece, these days we keep talking about supply chain disruptions and so on and so forth, etc. The world has seen those ever since COVID, and maybe even before, with all the nationalism which has pervaded the discussions. At another level, for someone like yourselves, which focuses on artisans, I gather 55,000 of them that you support at this point in time, that you work with, and making sure that there is very ethical sourcing. In some ways, in an industry where everybody wants scale, everybody wants to do things quickly, does the way you actually do your sourcing become a bottleneck to you being able to do things faster, quicker, and stuff like that?
So, that's what I call the efficiency conundrum, because at the bottom of the pyramid, you need mass production and you need scale,
right.
and there's no getting around it. But consumers are interesting, because as they get that, and as you begin to climb out of the socio-economic ladder, you climb out of subsistence and you come into the middle class, and the yearning that people have is for individuality and attention. Right. So, you might say that at the bottom of the pyramid, you need to have absolute mass to scale, made to a price, and that is a large market. And companies recent retailers in India have done a brilliant job of capturing that market and really making most of those. It's difficult to make those products by hand because the economics don't work, and especially if you want to pay artisans well, you can't do that. So we have positioned ourselves really in a place where, as you come into an aspirational way of thinking and you want to aspire to something, then we're there for you. But we're not going to try to go into the level where the product has to be mass produced at the lowest possible price, because that is not something that we are set up to do.
Right.
Our product is going to be design led and going to be more premium, but it's not luxury. So, and we find that there are probably about 200 million premium customers in India, which is
right.
a sizable market.
So when you compete with, let's say, I'm just picking up, let's say, some public sector units and so on and so forth, etc., which might have a very different sourcing strategy. And I think I want to get the focus a little bit on the whole ethical sourcing piece that you have, and the fact that which you just said, that every piece ought to be a bit differentiated, etc. It is a lot of hard work in that sense.
So for me, ethical sourcing is about understanding the situation in India. In India, we have an agricultural sector that accounts for around 17 to 18% of total gross domestic product. But 50% of people are involved with it. So you have a mismatch here where 17% of the economy is based on agriculture, but 50% of the population is dependent on it. So to me, the first form of compassion is to take the jobs to where the people are.
Right.
Because otherwise you will get wave upon wave of rural to urban migration, and our cities, as you know, are already heaving. Our total fertility rate has come down to around 2.1% on an aggregate for the country, which means that in the next 30 to 40 years, population growth will sort of level off. But till then, we have to provide a massive amount of jobs in rural areas. And that is the first priority. And it's something that the government recognizes, and many ministries are working on it. But it is the need of the hour to provide 20 million new jobs every year in rural areas.
Yeah.
Because what happens in the economics of rural India is that when you split a family and the man usually leaves and goes to work in the city and works as a peon or whatever it damages the social fiber hugely, because the children see their father once a year maybe, and it's a very difficult situation. So the way you reverse that is focusing, and for us, our biggest success has been in home-based workers.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, labor law, which is borrowed from the West mostly, is written for people to work in factories or offices, and home-based workers tend to not get the focus that I think they deserve, because in the Indian social situation, you have a woman usually looking after her in-laws and her children and keeping the social ties in the community. Now, if she can spend 4 or 5 hours a day making the product that you see behind you, which is all made by women in the western, in Chautan, Alamsar, the western reaches of Barmer district along the border, Pakistan, these products are made, and there's a lot of handwork that goes into them. So each product would take maybe a woman 4 to 5 days to make.
Right.
Now, while she's making them, she's at home attending to all her other needs.
Right.
So in this way, if one can create flexible ways of employment, then you can really, businesses can, take that and be incentivized. And I think you will have to incentivize businesses, because if you don't, the issue is that why would a business set up a unit, 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away from where it's headquartered, when they can work on a slum on the outskirts of town? So that kind of incentive, if were provided, I think there could be an explosion in rural employment.
And since you mentioned, you give the example, but are there a lot of women in your so as to call supply chain?
So I always think of women as India's secret labor force. Right. I mean, they can boost economic growth and get us to the 2047 target of the Prime Minister of Viksit Bharat sooner, because we have a massive labor force that is willing to work, but business have to tailor the ways they work for those people.
Yeah.
And it's not about setting so much about rural call centers, but understanding how people can be made to be productive in the communities in which they live, which means taking the jobs out to them.
Right. We all keep talking in our own small way about upliftment of our rural areas at large, but I think taking employment to them is such a wonderful idea. And I think I know there's a lot of skilling programs that we have at this point in time, but really taking employment to them. And I think I really liked your point about the disruption that it causes to the family when the male member or any member of the family goes elsewhere to work. I think it sort of impacts the social fabric as well. But William, just on if I may, I think you also spend a huge amount of resources and time on getting, these people in some ways more skilled or more abled, if I may call it so. Whether it is, on the digital topics and so on and so forth, etc. What do you think has been the uptake? I mean, have they been savvy about it? Have they found it hard? How has it been?
Well, I think that people naturally, the greatest resource of India, it's like our oil, what oil is to Saudi Arabia, our entrepreneurs are to India.
Right.
And we have a culture of entrepreneurship that is in the smallest place, in the smallest village, in the smallest region, the people are entrepreneurs by heart. They're incredibly creative. Problem solving comes naturally to people, huge economic resilience. So what do you do with that? And there's also been a revolution today in machinery for small scale units.
Right.
So I believe that, I think the most important ministry, in my opinion, and I'm glad the government also has put a lot of emphasis in it with the PM's Vishwakarma scheme and all, is the Ministry of MSME.
Right.
It's the M in MSME that can move the needle for massive rural employment. It's the first M stands for micro, small and medium enterprises. And, entrepreneurship comes so naturally that if we could just get good advice to people. And for example, what we try to do is we have a program where we grow entrepreneurs in the sense that you give them access to design, access to orders, advances, a few simple things. It's like a starter kit. You give them the starter kit and they take off. I'll give you an example of a place in central India, which is an incredible place called Maheshwar. It's a small town called Maheshwar on the banks of the Narmada River. Now, it was started, and these saris have a very interesting history because it goes all the way back to Ahilyabai Holkar, whose 300th birth anniversary was just celebrated. That it was a town built on this tradition, and it almost died out so what happened is just by giving it that little bit of a spark, and there was a handloom school put up there, which nobody, everybody thinks of a BCom academy or whatever, but to set up a handloom school was quite amazing. But what it is, it ignited the micro enterprises there. And today there are hundreds of tiny units. Some of them are not so small now, micro and small enterprises that are providing huge amounts of employment. It's a case study. Employment went through the roof.
Right.
Incomes went through the roof. And there's such a pride in the place. This is a product that is it's a geographical indicator for Maheshwar. So from every point of view, cultural preservation, employment generation, income generation, and there are many such stories like that waiting to happen across the country.
Right. So that brings me to the next topic, William, if I may. There's so much focus that you put on India's evolution or India's, I wouldn't call it, I think it's possibly, we possibly are unfair when we say rural, urban and so on and so forth. But in some ways, I would just call it a lot more inclusive, and at the same time, you also have a business which you are running very, very well. You have a couple of investors from what I gather. Now, do you think that there is a bit of a paradox that you have to deal with when you have investors in your business, etc., who really want to make sure that you are, competing, which of course you are, and you also have this huge sense of purpose and focus on craftsmanship and local sourcing, etc. Does it create a paradox?
Yes, I mean, it does, because the investment horizon, as you know better than anybody, is getting shorter and shorter. And private equity funds are putting that on they're like adrenaline, because their timelines get shorter and shorter. So because of the structure of fees and carry and hurdle rates, it's just the design of it is such. And some of my best friends are in private equity, but they have to come in and make money in 3 years, otherwise the hurdle catches up. So what we do in a situation like that is try to look for investors with a longer focus.
Right.
And say, look, we've been around for 65 years. In an age where the average life of a business is 15 years, it dies out. I have seen hundreds of business models come like rockets and go. We last because we play a long game, we play a medium game, and we play a short game.
Yeah.
Now, in the short run, our growth will be slower than some of our competitors. But over a 5-year period, you will see that many of those competitors come and go, whereas we are a steady state business. And because we have a plan for what we're planning to do in 5 years and in 10 years, we're investing in that plan, and it's likely to lead to a slower growth maybe in profits. Like right now, I would say that about 6 to 7% of our OPEX is being invested, not our CapEx, our OPEX is being invested in projects which will begin to bear fruit in 5 years.
Right. OPEX.
So we need investors who understand that and say, look, we might not be here in 5 years, but we respect what you're doing, because you're creating, a long, rope for the businesses.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the opportunities that we have, and I'm glad that you mentioned, private equity funds in particular, or private capital, should I say, taking a long-term view, because that's what we need. I mean, a large part of Indian FDI is really private equity money at this point in time, and we need them to stay longer and not necessarily look for short-term outcomes. So William, my last question in this segment really, there has been a generational shift. I see it in my own family at the moment. And India has got a very young workforce now. It's getting younger. As you said, we'll see when the demographic dividend gives up. But I think at the moment we have a very young workforce. So how is it that you are able to make sure that you continue to be relevant right across age groups in some ways, particularly the young age group, which seems to be consuming a lot? I mean, the savings rate, of course, has dipped, so which means that hopefully people are consuming more and aiding the economy. But how do you continue to stay relevant to various segments of consumers?
So we are seeing two, in terms of the consumer, we're seeing two trends. One is the young would want a Western clothing and home furnishings that are more Western in their appeal. Right. And that is because they're exposed to a very global set of design and ideas, and many of them are working in companies that have global workforces. So for them, we have created a completely new Western label, which is interesting because it's connected to Indian sensibilities. It's not, because there's no point in trying to do a Zara or a Massimo Dutti or a Uniqlo, because frankly, those companies are so good at what they do. You'd be competing with, So what we've done is we've created our own language and we've test marketed it, and it seems to have struck a real chord with consumers, both online and in physical retail. So we're going to push that, and we have a large design investment to take that forward. The other area is that, in a way, the core Fabindia brand is about crafts and artisanship, and that is going to, in the next 10 years, going to become a lot more expensive, which is a good thing because daily wage rates and monthly salaries are going to increase with the artisan community, and I welcome that.
So one of the topics, William, again, and I gather that's close to your heart, is the whole focus on sustainability. How do you look at the broader sustainability segment for you, and how are you trying to create greater impact on that one?
I think in the long term, if you look at a 10-year, you cannot move away from ESG. You can't move away from it. And if a business says, oh, no, politically now ESG is out and it's no longer a trend, as soon as you look at it, most corporate leaders look at it as a trend. And I think that's the first mistake they make, because it is core to your business. And I think, again, as an advisory, in the advisory work you do, I'm sure that's something you tell your clients. It should be core to your business, because ESG has actually two words in it. It's environmental and social. Now, in the West, the focus has been largely on environmental sustainability. My idea is that you focus both on environmental sustainability, but also on social sustainability. Social sustainability in India means where you provide your jobs, the products you produce, how you produce them, the kinds of people involved with production in the products. And, so if it's a product that is made by women who live in rural areas, you should get additional points for that, just because it is a need of the hour in an economy like ours. Now, that might not be true in, say, a European economy, but it's certainly key to what we need to do here if we're going to move the needle is in terms of, per capita GDP and general growth. But paying lip service to sustainability is, I think, the most dangerous thing corporations do, because everybody in their annual report has the para on sustainability. You must have read 100 of them. But it's like, okay, we got to tick that box. You go down, we have to say this. We tick the sustainability box. But and this is very important to remember, the young are very different in their work from older generations. They want to work for a purpose. So if they sense a purpose-driven organization, which comes from being true to its ESG, then you get a different kind of young people in your workforce. And I've seen this certainly in the more developed world, where young people say, I don't want to work for a company like this. What does it stand for? I don't want to sell a product that's bad for your health. Kids ask these questions, and they are your future workforce. And more importantly, they bring skills that businesses need. So if they see a management team that's just paying lip service, the organization knows it. And I think it's important to imbue the organization with a higher purpose, because otherwise, every organization has to make a return on capital employed and make a profit. But if you can imbue the organization with a higher purpose, like we are here to also do this, it fires up people in a completely different way.
Do you also think that the young generation buys sustainably? Because, if I can just give one example, the fact that we are very focused on creating certain outcomes for society always comes up in our people surveys as a reason why people want to work with us, for instance. So is that also, from a consumer standpoint, also you get the benefit of, quote unquote, being a little bit more sustainable than others?
People forget that your employees are also consumers. So if they work in a company and they say this company is really on fire with its mission and purpose, and it's got a higher purpose. Yes, it's making profits, but it's got a higher purpose. I think that itself sends such a positive signal out in society. The other thing is that the main determinant of longevity is adherence to a vision. I know every corporate puts it on their walls when you walk into their office. But it is the true adherence to the vision which is really a marker for longevity. If you look at any company that's been around more than 30, 40 years, it's been there because of its vision. And ESG gives you, in a way, the most powerful vision. Being committed to that gives you a very powerful vision. So I believe that it's essential to the business. And corporates that don't look at it as essential to the business are limiting their own lifespans.
So William, if I may, over all these years, have there been few decision points that you have had to make, which have, typically we all make decisions and as people who are trying to lead organizations, and I'm sure we give it enough time and thought, and we hopefully are able to conclude. But have there been one or two decisions, without specifically going into the decision itself, which have troubled you, or which have made you think more than you normally would? And what's been the process that you followed to come to a decision in those cases?
Wow. So one of the toughest decisions I took was when we were really doing well in our export business. I jumped ship and went into retail. And our export business, began to really falter. But we had only a limited amount of bandwidth and money, and I bet the house on the retail business. I think from that to, deciding how you're going to resist short-term pressures, I think that to me is increasingly the hardest thing, because as investors and markets get more and more short-term, you have to sort of, ensure that you communicate well enough, that you tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that's often a difficult decision, because you have to really, really be clear about why you're doing certain things. Because I want the company to be around 30 years from now. So I do things keeping that time horizon in mind, and not the next 2, 3, 4 quarters. You also have to focus on deliver results, but keeping in mind that. And that has been, in a way, the hardest thing to do. And I've realized the way to do is you have to just communicate a lot. Like, I write a monthly letter to all our investors.
To investors.
Yeah, and it's detailed. And we tell them about challenges facing the business, and truly tell them about the real challenges facing a business, the opportunities that we see and how we're progressing. And you have to be brutally honest with them when you're not measuring up to a standard. Because the advantage with that kind of honesty is that later on, it makes it hard for people to criticize you, because you've already said, well, we messed up.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And again, communication is the other challenge that we have. At times, we don't communicate well enough in leadership, but the fact that you communicate with them every month and appraise them of what's happening is again very, very incredible. Let me just ask you one more thing. When it comes to, in particular, leading through disruption, and we have seen a lot of disruption. Of course, COVID, I'm sure, was a significant disruption. For many of us, it helps us change course, and in many cases positively, I'm sure, for you as well. And then, of course, there have been multiple disruptions thereafter. Any messages that you would have for business owners, CEOs, and others who continue to deal with disruptions?
So I think the pace of disruptions, you're absolutely right, Sanjeev, is accelerating. And so the first thing you do is you tell people, I'm very honest. I said, look, if we cannot improvise, the physical business is in trouble. So you start with a statement of truth. Because if you try to hide the truth, you spend a lot of time and energy trying to hide the truth. And people like partners and investors spend their time and energy trying to uncover the truth. So you say to people, like, this is it. This is where we're at. The other thing is you do not indulge in gimmickry. Because today, a lot of corporates, the temptation has been to go into gimmickry. Sloganeering, just quick flashy things, quick brand and brand campaigns and all. Because gimmickry is at best a sideshow. It's like a smoke screen. But the worst that can happen is sometimes management drinks their own Kool-Aid and they begin to believe in the gimmicks. So you want to avoid that at all costs. You want to be, because it also, defining the problem helps you solve it. Because I have been saying for 3 years that physical retail has to be reinvented. We're at our Kodak moment. We don't want to be Kodak. Kodak was an outstanding company, but we're at a Kodak moment. So let's because then it brings out solutions and ideas that are truly, innovative and in some cases revolutionary.
I think one question I have to ask, there could be potentially a conflict in the mind of particularly second generation and third generation leaders about embracing change, transformation, and legacy. I'm not sure if you just sort of face that ever, but for many others, they might be actually facing this because, there are some very strong foundations on which, you could leverage, and yet you need to embrace change. At times, your teams possibly don't move at fast a pace at which you would like them to, etc., because you want to bring in new things. What would your advice be to these set of business owners?
So I think that part of the job of leadership, now whether you have been a second generation, third generation leader, or you're a professional leader, is to say that this is the mountain we need to climb. Right? And I think a lot of people aren't clear about that. So as a leader, you need to have a lot of time to be able to reflect on which mountains you want to climb and how you want to do it. Because the worst kind of leader is someone who's always busy. And I admire you for that, Sanjeev, because whenever I've met you, you've seemed like the most relaxed person I've met. And it's important to be absolutely free. Because if you're free and your mind is able to read interesting things and see interesting things and do things that don't have to do with your work, but give you peripheral ideas, that you begin to, understand which mountains you need to climb. Then you need to communicate that to a team and say, guys, listen, we're going to climb this mountain. You're in charge of oxygen. You're in charge of the camps. You're in charge of setting campsites. And then you give people a very clearly communicated objective.
Right.
Because I think a lot of objectives today that I see companies give out are what I call pie in the sky thinking, which is like, you're going to open 1,000 stores, or you're going to build this. And what leaders then do is they say, okay, I need X amount of money. And you're basically return on capital employed, and all these numbers go out the window then. And you begin to lead in a fashion which is not sustainable.
Right.
And because ultimately our gravity is return on capital employed.
Right.
If we cannot give you an efficient return on capital employed, gravity should pull us down.
Yeah.
Which the markets do. And they take a little bit of time sometimes, but they always get there. And so once the leader has said, we need to climb this mountain, then the teams need to have the tools and demonstrate those tools, whether they be Gantt or however. They need to put them down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do this week, next week, this is how I'm going to get there. I'm just hoping the leader has asked us to climb the right mountain. Because that's the only job that leadership can do.
Right. Right.
And years ago, I made a terrible mistake. And I in a hurry, I made a decision based on arbitrage, which is not a good decision. I mean, basically our valuation was 10 times top line, and there was an English company's valuation who was 0.25 top line. Now there was a reason for that, because England is a saturated market, and they were a company that we had dealt with, and so we acquired them. And everybody said, I remember the front page in one of the business newspapers was like, Fabindia does a reverse East India Company,
Right.
But all that is gimmickry.
Yeah.
We bought a company in England at, albeit a very low price. It had a higher turnover than ours, but we bought it for 1/4 of their top line when we were being valued at 10 times our top line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the day I made that decision, our valuation dropped to 5 times top line. Because the markets recognize, and smart investors recognize that this was a really dumb move. And it was a mistake. And what tempted us was that we thought that, we could export to this company and, we could revive the business.
Right.
But we had no experience of dealing with England, which was a completely saturated market.
Yeah.
We were coming from a market where consumers were hungry for our product, going to a market where it was very difficult. As one customer one day told me, she said, the last thing I need is another dress.
Yeah.
And at that moment, the penny dropped. I was like, why did we make this investment?
Yeah.
And then, we were able to, exit it reasonably gracefully. We lost money, but that's how you do it.
William, I have to say this. It takes a lot of courage to say what you've just said, and I think I just credit you for saying this, and I think there's a lot of learning out there for many of us, because we all like to talk about, the grand successes that we have made, but what you just shared, I think it's incredible. It's incredible.
Grand failure.
A lot of learning, but honestly, a lot of learning in that. And we may not talk about it as you have. We may not have the courage to talk about it, but there's a lot of learning in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing is that if I'd had the time, I was a very busy leader at that time. If I'd had the time to go to England and go to the small towns in which this company had its stores, they were beautiful stores, and listen to their customers, I wouldn't have climbed that mountain. Yeah. See, the teams executed perfectly. They all did their jobs. But as a leader, you got them to climb the wrong mountain.
Right.
And that was what I realized. And after that, I realized that you have to spend a lot of time before deciding where you're going to go as a leader.
Right. Right. But William, thanks for doing this. My last question is a bit of a personal one. And I think we all know the Fabindia brand. Everybody, loves it, adores it. But we know very little about William, right? The man behind Fabindia. Why is that so?
Because I believe it's important for the brand to speak for itself. I am not on social media. I'm a dark person that way. I stay off it. I feel that it's important to keep your mind clear. And I'm clear that this is about the company and what it stands for. There are brands known for the founder. I mean, Richard Branson is a great favorite of mine because he's so good at, in fact, he is the brand in this case. Right. But in my case, I've taken a very conscious effort that the brand, what it stands for, and the people who are in it need to be in the forefront. And leadership needs to be something that, is in the background.
William, thank you so much for that. That's a wonderful story, and putting yourself behind while you're the one who's causing all the outcomes, putting the brand and people first, is that story and humility is something that all of us can learn from. But thank you so much, William, for doing this.
Thank you, Sanjeev. This has been fun, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, William. And that's a wrap on this episode of Future Unplugged. There's a lot more to come, so make sure to follow the show and stay with us as we continue to bring you conversations about what lies ahead with voices shaping the future. Until next time, stay tuned for the next one.